Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another hour of Healthy Conclusions, where we try to give our listeners important information on nutrition, exercise, and holistic, alternative, and integrative medicine. Please take a minute to visit our website at www.healthyconclusions.com and like us on Facebook. My name is Bob Neugebauer, and I will be your host for this evening's show. Tonight's show is being brought to you by Altrua Health Share, which has been serving its members and their families with their health care needs since 1997. Please take a moment to visit their website at altruahealthshare.org or call 888-244-3839 to see just what Altrua Health Share can offer for your family's health care needs. It could mean substantial savings. Our guest for this evening is Dr. John M. Harmon. He did his graduate studies at the University of Utah and has a B.S. degree in human biology. He then attended the Los Angeles College of Chiropractic and graduated summa cum laude in December of 1989 and has been practicing chiropractic medicine in Boise area ever since. He has always been very interested and concerned about brain-based disorders and has done extensive study and training about how the brain waves work and how imbalances in the power of the brain waves cause brain-based disorders. He now owns and operates Clear Mind Center of Idaho, which he does quantitative encephalograms to measure the power of brain waves in different lobes of the brain. So it's nice to have you here, Doctor. Many of our listeners would recognize the name biofeedback, but I'm not so sure that they would understand the term neurofeedback, which is pretty much what you're doing. Could you explain the difference between the two?
Sure. I'd first like to say thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Biofeedback is a system in which different electrical measuring machines are hooked up to the body, measuring things like heart rate, breathing, sweating, and those types of things, body temperature. And then the patient is guided into either, let's take heart rate, for example, either lowering the heart rate by concentrating his or her brain waves or body to do certain things, and then try to keep it in that mode by changing the way the brain is working and controlling the body. Neurofeedback is very similar in that we are trying to achieve some changes in the brain. It's very scientific. The EEG, we'll just call it an EEG rather than electroencephalogram, is performed, used to cost several $1,000s in a hospital, but technology has made it so we can do it right in our office. And each of the different lobes of the brain are measured, and there are 4 different types of brain waves that are measured, and we're trying to find out where there's too much power or too little power. And then neurofeedback is the way of retraining those brain waves to go back into the proper mode so that the person doesn't have symptoms like depression and anxiety and ADD, different things like that. So it's very similar. And the EEG was approved in 2013 by the FDA for the diagnosis of attention disorders. So it's something that's garnering a lot of attention for being effective in both diagnosing and then the neurofeedback as treating.
So can we liken this to an EKG machine where it tests the heart and different parts of the heart? Is it very similar?
Similar to that, but for the brain.
For the brain. Okay. So with neurofeedback, you're using a computer to measure brain waves from different areas of the brain. How many areas of the brain are there that you would be measuring?
There are 10, plus 2 right in the midline. So we have lobes on each side of the brain from the midline. We're measuring those 10, and then two right in the middle of the brain.
And what are these different lobes?
They're the frontal lobes. There's the temporal lobes right over by the ear. There's a lobe called the central, and then there's parietal, and then occipital.
Okay, and what is the function of these particular lobes? Because I know they all have a particular function, because I read about this all the time.
They do, and they're quite varied. And I actually have a sheet in my office that goes through and lists all of the different things that each lobe will do, and it's not always the same on each side. For example, we refer to the temporal lobes as anger, sadness, when we're referring to them with patients, and the frontal lobes are have a lot to do with attention and decision making. Occipital lobes, dreaming and vision. So there are different functions for each one. The central lobes are right up where the sensory and motor strips meet. Motor, where you initiate control; sensory, where you actually detect things that are going on in the body through the sensory system.
So your brain's kind of like a factory that has different things going on in different parts at different times.
Exactly.
Very simple. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about it. Could you tell us about what you use as standards to measure brain waves and how that came about?
You know, when I tell patients that at the end of the day when we're doing their EEG, that I'm going to upload their raw data into the database, and the database is going to compare their brain to 160,000 normals. There's always a shock on their face. I say, this is no small project. The ClearMind system has a huge database. So what it does, it compares their brain waves, the power in their brain waves, to normals for their age, and then tells me where the dysfunctions are. It's not something that I came up with, but it's been those normative values have been accumulated over decades. So it's
who determines what these values are and what the standards are going to be? I know, there are certain standards for people that are trying to become healthy or lose weight.
Right.
What are the standards that they would use, and who would be the one that would dictate those?
Those have been accumulated for a long time, since the late 1800s, actually, when the first electrodes were placed on an exposed brain of an animal. And the EEG has been around for decades. There's a 40 to 50 year history of doing EEGs and getting normal data. The specific agency, I don't think there is one specific one, but there's an accepted what is normal. We know what each type of brainwave, we know what the normal values are. And if you want me to, I can tell you what they are, but it's well known throughout worldwide what those normal values are.
Well, let me ask you a question. What part do you play now in getting these brain waves, collecting them, putting them through the system? And is this something that has just started to come into vogue in the last few years, or is it something that you said electroencephalograms have been around for 50 years? Is this something new that we just started?
The system that I use is the first one to bring it all together and turn it into something that happens automatically, rather than trying to coach someone into trying to get their brain into the proper mode. We have a system that senses when it gets there, and then it rewards the brain for getting there, and then deprives the brain of that reward when it gets out of the proper power mode. It is true, neurofeedback has been around a long time. I'm always amazed so many people will ask me, well, how come I haven't heard about this? My answer is our system is more based on drugs and changing the brain waves through drugs, because those drugs actually do change the brain waves. I hope I answered your question. It has been around. It has a 40 to 50 year history of permanency once you change the brain waves and get them into the right mode.
Okay, so that's been going on for quite some time.
Yes.
What are you doing that's new, different, anything?
What am I doing?
Yeah.
The system that I use, the ClearMind system, is the first one to bring several different means of training the brain into one, and it's all in line with the computer. And a person will sit and, for example, watch a video of their choice and listen to it, and they're viewing through specialized glasses. This is the part of the neurofeedback. The glasses are pulsing depending on what they need with a different color in different quadrants of their visual field. Researchers know that will either increase or decrease the power in certain waves, and once it gets there, it rewards it. But what we are doing that is different is that's all automatic while someone sits.
Okay, we're going to have to take a quick break here. We'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Health Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share with your host Bob Neugebauer on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Dr. Harmon, and we're talking about electroencephalograms and brainwaves. So, Doc, what does it mean in layman's terms when your brain waves are working harmoniously together or regulated, or when they are in disharmony or dysregulation? And what's the difference? And what are you trying to change?
Well, we talked about the 10 different areas that we monitor, and if you can imagine that there's a different symphony going on in each lobe. You got your woodwinds, you got your percussion, you have your strings, and you have your horns. You can imagine if the drums are extremely loud and the woodwinds are so soft you can't hardly hear them. It sounds, there's not a lot of harmony going on in there, and it sounds off. That's what occurs in each one of those lobes. And the outcome of the different, the waves, the different frequencies having too much power or not enough is fairly predictable. If you, for example, have sleep waves that have way too much power in them, sleep is not going to be good. You're going to have some fuzzy thinking. You're going to have some other deficits, some cognitive deficits. Am I answering that question?
Well, would a good analogy of this be a good example of brain waves that are dysregulated be like a symphony tuning up before a performance, or a car that has a bad spark plug and is misfiring? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, everybody's playing a different song and it doesn't sound harmonious. That is correct.
Okay. All right, so like an orchestra conductor or an auto mechanic, you diagnose the problem or problems with the EEG to get the neurofeedback, and then through therapeutic methods attempt to fix the problem. So what are those methods and how do you go about them?
Okay, we do the EEG. I get a 13-page report back. There are there's lots of information in the EEG, not the least of which is the actual brain map that kind of looks like a weather map. It has different colors on it telling me these areas are too high, 1 or 2 standard deviations, too powerful, or low. And from that brain map, the system gives me answers to which protocols am I going to use. Let's say that we're going to work on the frontal lobes first. It'll tell me, okay, the horn section over on the left side of the brain has too much power. We need to decrease the power there, and the drum section is like really soft. We need to get a little more volume in the drum section in that side. So specific protocols are selected for retraining that brain. So we have sensors on that part of the brain. It's detecting those brain, and they're changing all the time. They're going up and down, up and down. It's sensing when that happens, and when that brain, those lobes get into the proper mode, the system rewards the brain by letting it see the video and hear the audio, and then cuts it back by half when it gets out of that proper mode. So after a while, the brain starts to catch on, saying, you know what, if I want to see that, I have to be here. And if we do that repetitively enough, it increases the circulation to that part of the brain. And then the brain starts making the appropriate changes to keep it in that proper power mode.
So how do you know, excuse me, how do you know what to use as, should I say, the therapy to get the brain to do different things? Do you have certain videos? Do you have certain ways of visually people look at something and then automatically the brain goes towards that area?
The protocols themselves, when the the data is uploaded into the system, it compares it to normal, and then it evaluates, and it'll say, okay, these have way too much power, these don't have enough. There are 33 different protocols according to what parts we need to increase power and where we need to decrease them. And then there are different numbers on the computer that I watch as they go through the treatment. Some of them give me an indication that someone has ADD or ADHD. Others indicate the brain is set up for depression or anxiety. And we're watching how those things are changing. I see tracings on the power of those different waves. And we watch and see those changes, and then we see, okay, it's made the changes there. Now we need to do another brain map to see what the priority is now, because they will change.
Now, is there a specific way that you get these brain waves to become more powerful or less powerful?
Yes, it's all by what's called operant conditioning. That's how we learn anything. It's like learning how to ride a bike. We learned when we were little, and you can be off of it, not ride a bike for 20 or 30 years, but you still remember how. So the brain is rewarded. If you could see the screen that I see, the brain waves are going, they're increase, decrease as your cells are functioning. And so, and the cells, the function of the cells give off these different waves. So if they're too active, they're going to give off a bigger power on my reading. So the sensors are sensing, what is it doing? Is it still doing that where it's giving off these really powerful waves? Well, as they're going up and down, as far as in power and down in power, right when it gets into the proper power mode, the system rewards it for being there and then deprives it of that reward when it gets out. So it starts to learn, just like riding a bike or learning how to snowboard.
So when a brain is not functioning properly, I would presume evidence of this usually shows up in the EEG activity. Just like any other muscle in the body, the brain has the ability to repair itself. So can we presume that, like our bodies, we exercise to stay physically fit? The neurofeedback is a method of keeping your brain mentally fit. And if it's doing that, how often do you have to go through this process to retrain it?
It depends on the dysfunction, but usually somewhere between 20 and 40 sessions. So you can imagine going into a gym and you're 50 pounds overweight and haven't worked out in your life, and you go in and the trainer says, okay, 9 months from today or a year or whatever it's going to be, you're going to be there. It doesn't take 9 months with the brain, but anywhere between 20 and 40 sessions. Usually at twice a week, but if someone has severe anxiety or depression, we'll have them come every day for about a week to get that a faster change, give them a faster change. And then about at every 10 visits, we do another brain map to then get their new priority, what we need to fix.
Okay, unlike an MRI or CT scan, that looks at the structure of the brain, neurofeedback assesses brain function through the use of non-intrusive sensors placed in various locations on the scalp to measure electroactivity of the brain. So what methods do you use to retain a brain that has become dysfunctional? Would you, for instance, use the visual technique like a video game or a movie or something sad or something happy? Where do you go with this? And how do you know what to use?
We can use any video that is not extremely sad. We don't want violence, and we don't want something that makes them laugh. We want them to sit perfectly still watching a movie of their choice. A lot of adults like documentaries. We have them, but they can watch any show that isn't one of those, or sexual in nature. So not sad, not sexual, not too like a comedy, because the laughter generates some electricity up where some of those muscles go clear up on the sides of the brain and in the back. So that in and of itself will generate electricity. These waves. So we want them still watching a movie. My assistant or myself, we're in the room in observing this. So they can watch, we stream things from Netflix, or they can bring a movie from home and watch that while their brain is being changed.
Now, have you ever used video games as part?
We don't
parcel
use
of this?
video games because those, you're actually actively doing something. We want the brain at rest, see what's happening with that without any electrical brain waves generated through muscle activity.
So you don't want any motor activity, you just want brain activity.
Correct.
Sounds like a very interesting system. Can you tell approximately how many visits it would take to diagnose and fix a relatively simple problem with neurofeedback therapy? And when I think about this, when you bring somebody in to sit down, how do you know through this EEG if they are ADHD?
That's a really good question. Squirrel. That's one way. But the brain waves actually tell us that. And the typical ADHD pattern is going to be, without getting too complex, the delta and theta are two of the slower waves. Well, the theta are daydreaming waves, and delta are sleep waves. Those are typically really high, and their fast focus waves are low. So they're not able to focus, and their brain's bouncing around, and it gets frustrating for parents. They say, Johnny, pay attention. Johnny can't pay attention.
All right, I'm going to have to wave and break you off for a minute here. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Health Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share, with your host, Bob Neugebauer, on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. Welcome back to Healthy Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Dr. John Harmon, and we're talking about EEGs and brain waves and how we can fix people who have problems like ADHD. So, Doc, we were talking about delta and theta waves and how one is calm, one is high activity. Is that correct?
Delta and theta are usually high, and beta waves, which are fast focus waves, are low. They don't have enough power to run the system.
So if somebody comes into your office and you see these theta waves going crazy, you presume they have some sort of a problem? Or is that not so?
Well, everybody has a different amount of power in their brain, and it's all relative to each lobe. And that is true, and we see that on the brain map. The brain waves are generated by cellular activity in the brain. So we know if these are really high, those cells are abnormally, functioning too much. And so if you're going to get some outcome that is fairly predictable if the cells have too much activity or not enough. And then that is, we use the EEG to determine whether or not they are too active or not active enough.
Now, I know that you can do a lot of different things with this neurofeedback, but how would you help somebody with neurological issues such as a stroke or aneurysm, brain surgery, concussion, anxiety, sleep problems, things like that?
Let's take the first one, stroke or aneurysm. Causes degeneration in the cells. They lose some of those cells. So,
in the brain.
In the brain. Neurofeedback through MRI studies over a long term has been shown to not only increase circulation to the brain, which then brings in more oxygen to those areas.
You're talking about the affected areas by the stroke.
Yes.
Okay.
Which then cause the brain to regenerate neurons that have been lost. And that's been shown on numerous MRI studies where they've done it before and after, and they say, whoa, we have this new neuron growth. So this is what makes neurofeedback permanent. And people ask me that, do I need to keep coming after I do these sessions? And my answer is no, you do not. Once you get to that point, we've reached permanence, and now the brain knows how to stay in those proper power modes, and then you don't have things like anxiety and depression or whatever it is, the sleep disorder.
So with somebody with a stroke, you could actually help them repair that part of the brain that has been affected by the stroke?
Yes, and that was one of the most remarkable things that I heard in my training from Dr. Richard Suter, who is one of the world's foremost authorities on this. And he said, now, this man's family was very committed to helping him get better, and it took 2 years because it was so bad, but he went from a wheelchair and not being able to talk. He came walking and talking into one of their seminars. That impressed me, and my whole career has been about helping people and getting the biggest thrill by seeing people get better like that. Those types of things are very, very powerful to me as a healthcare provider, to be able to help people do.
There's been a lot of news about how the football players have been getting these enormous amounts of concussions, and then when they do take a look at their brain after they've died, they find that this is not a good thing. Is it possible that what you're doing could be part of a solution to that problem?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is one of the things that the neurofeedback is for, to retrain the brain, increase the circulation, help and do it long enough so that we actually get regeneration and changes in both white matter and gray matter. The white matter, those are the interconnecting neurons, and the gray matter is the cortex. Those are the cells where things happen. And MRI studies have shown that it does help those things regenerate.
Are they using this? I mean, are the football teams using a neurofeedback system to help their players or not? Because we hear about so many problems, but we don't hear about any help.
Specifically, maybe that's my calling, is to get the word out. But I know that the Air Force Academy uses it for cadets. Music academies use it to train, and they require it for their students to go through it. Sports teams have used it. The Brazilian soccer team used it when they won the World Cup. There are lots of it's catching on, and it is so non-invasive. It doesn't put anything into a person's brain and then try to artificially stimulate something. It just rewards the brain for doing the right things and then deprives it of that reward when it gets out of that mode. And so then it makes changes on its own.
So you're telling me that you can repair some of this damage. I'm not saying all of the damage, but you can repair some of the damage that's been done by these constant concussions.
Yes.
By these football players.
And
can they return to normalcy?
You know, that would be irresponsible for me to say that everybody gets 100% better.
Well, we know nobody can say that, but
correct. And that's why it would be irresponsible. However, sometimes it doesn't take huge changes to get huge results. For example, with anxiety, let's just take that for one, and I might be changing the subject, but it's very pertinent. Anxiety, one of the markers of anxiety is your fast focus waves are too powerful on the right side. It's one of the two brain waves where asymmetry is appropriate. One is your beta, one is your alpha, but if beta waves have too much power on the right, it's anxiety. So if we can just get those to come down a little on the right and up a little on the left, it makes a huge impact on that person's life with that anxiety. And the same is true with depression, but it's with alpha waves.
So do you see this as a new treatment that's going to be brought into vogue with the crazy NFL or the soccer teams who have the same problem?
There are teams that are already using it. Specifically, I don't know which ones. But when you say brought into vogue, I can tell you right now in 2013, the American Pediatric Association gave it their #1 best designation for treatment for attention disorders. So it is getting a lot of attention, that pun intended.
You know, a lot of us have sleep problems. Unfortunately, I don't have any sleep problems. I sleep like a baby, but I know a lot of my friends do. How would the neurofeedback help with the sleep problems?
It's one of the things it's really good for is insomnia. And usually someone has too much power in their fast focus waves. So they're trying to go to sleep and they can't shut off their brain. It just keeps going and going and going. There's that type of where they can't go to sleep. There's another type where they wake up in the middle of the night or at 2 o'clock and they can't go back to sleep. That's usually a timing problem. So it's a little bit different treatment for that, where their biological clock is off, and there's a way of switching that to go back.
You're saying their circadian rhythm is changing?
Yes. Yeah, it is. And it's those we treat up here where there's a misfiring of the connection between the sensory and the motor without getting too complex. It's a little bit different than I can't go to sleep. But there are specific protocols for insomnia.
You know, many of our armed forces personnel are coming home from fighting wars with what we call post-traumatic syndrome disorder, or PTSD. Is neurofeedback helpful in diagnosing this problem and in repairing it?
Very much so. One of the things that I get back in their report tells me if they have anxiety or PTSD. It's a change in certain frequencies of the brain waves. It happens to be the high alpha range where they're too low. Do you have time to talk about PTSD a little bit?
Go right ahead.
Okay. So post-traumatic stress disorder.
Your show.
There happens when an emotional stimulus is beyond our ability to process it, and they get stuck in what's called the amygdala. Usually when we have a stressful situation, unless it's a dire emergency, it goes up to certain parts of the brain to give us context. Okay, it looks like a coiled snake. Oh, but it's just a garden hose. Okay, I'm not going to get really excited about that. There are times in dire emergencies where it goes straight to the amygdala and triggers all the adrenaline and the other things you need to have in order to get away. People who have the PTSD, it's stuck in the fear. An interesting thing about that, the few people who have had strokes and have lost their amygdala, they've done tests on them. They're able to recognize every facial expression except fear. They cannot recognize fear because that's where fear is processed, in the amygdala.
They didn't live in the Obama years.
Careful there. So, yes, PTSD responds really well to this. I've met quite a few people in that involved with the veterans, and they are going to do an outreach to help those people get their life back and be able to function in society.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to have to take a quick break here. We'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Health Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share, with your host Bob Neugebauer on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Dr. John Harmon, and we're talking about neurofeedback. So, Doctor, pain management has been one of the biggest problems in our country today. And we have been trying to manage pain going back to 46 AD, when Aristotle and Plato used the electric ray fish. China used acupuncture. Hypnosis emerged in the 18th century along with pharmaceuticals. And electrical devices go back for 100 years. So now we're in the 21st century. So would you say that neurofeedback is one of the latest methods playing a part in the diagnosing of problems with the brain?
Yes, not only diagnosing, but helping to treat those types of things. When I get my report back, I look at where things are high and low, and there's one category, and it gives three possibilities. One is overload to the motor system, or overload to the sensory system. Overwhelm of the sensory system, overload from the motor system to the sensory, or fibromyalgia. And so if you think about it, most of us, when we walk into a room, like when I came into the studio, I see there's microphones, there are chairs, there are things on the wall, but after a while that is not significant anymore, and my sensory system really doesn't pay much attention to it. If there's an overload to someone's sensory system, like there's an overload from the skin or from the muscles, it's perceiving it as pain.
Kind of like an allergy or something where you've got a scratch.
Or, there's an inhibition of certain impulses going into the sensory part of the brain, but if there's an overload of that and it's just getting overwhelmed, now it starts to pass over into the sensing pain when there's really no need for that anymore, but it's a brainwave dysfunction. Those are the types of things that I can be helpful with for fibromyalgia type symptoms, chronic pain. So yes, your question, there's such a problem with the opiates. This is an alternative for someone seeking pain relief.
So somebody with fibromyalgia, and I have several very good friends of mine that have this, they're on pharmaceuticals, and none of them seem to be getting any help, or it's not improving their condition. So do you believe that neurofeedback is one of the things that could actually improve their situation?
Yes, I do, and it's not just something that I believe. It's an industry-wide thing where people who have fibromyalgia are getting help by correcting those the overwhelm from the sensory system, correcting those brain waves so that doesn't happen anymore.
So would something like this also work with something like Parkinson's disease?
Parkinson's, we can help in the initial stages. When it gets to the point where they have really bad tremors, there's so much damage that has occurred that there hasn't been improvement when it gets to that stage. But to prevent or to catch it really early, there have been some improvements.
What about something like MS that affects the brain and it affects the nerve coatings? Now, you say you can regenerate neurons, but nerve coatings, that's kind of a whole different story, is it not?
Yeah, it's from plaques in the brain. Specifically with MS, I haven't heard any research come out about that in neurofeedback yet.
Okay. Recently, the AMA has been recommending alternative methods of treatment for those with chronic pain because of the crisis we currently have with opioid use and the addiction and deaths that are caused by it each year. We're getting up to 100,000 a year now for overdoses. Would neurofeedback be used as part of that process of managing pain or just in diagnosing the problem? Because we have to find another way to manage pain.
We do.
The allopathic doctors don't appear to have a new method or a way to change this.
No, and it's probably quite frustrating for them because they don't have anything to offer other than opiates. They out of their goodness, their healthcare heart, they want to help people, and the only way they have to help them is through prescribing something, which is obviously artificial. So absolutely, neurofeedback is helpful for people who have chronic pain. Excuse me, and I take that as part of my purpose is to help people get off of those. And that's something they would have to work with their medical doctor in bringing them down off of those. And I do that with practitioners.
Have you or any of your associates been approached by any of the allopathic doctors in the recent past to work integratively with them into helping these opioid patients deal with their chronic pain and getting them off the opioids? Or is this something that they haven't even looked at yet? Or am I just kind of blowing smoke up here?
Yeah, wishful thinking?
Well, yes.
We hope that would occur. I welcome that. I've spoken with counselors and they are really open to that. And here's one of the reasons. I tell them my brain map, since we have each patient go online and do some in-depth questionnaires about their perception of themselves, well, we know what parts of the brain those functions come from. So when I give them their brain map, I say, your perception of yourself is that you have a moderate attention deficit. The brain map says it's actually a little worse than your perception, or the part of the brain that processes math will tell them if it's that is functioning properly, which differentiates between a neurogenic or a problem with the nerves and a psychogenic, which is my second grade teacher told me I'm not good at math, and I believed her. That's a psychogenic. That's a counseling issue. So working with counselors to help people discover what the cause of the psychogenic problem was is important, just as it is for me to correct the neurogenic problems.
Would it surprise you if I told you that 37 attorney generals from 37 different states have signed on to a pact to push for insurers to ensure payment for alternative medicines such as acupuncture, neurofeedback, Reiki, Qigong, acupuncture, all of these that help with chronic pain. There is an actual movement going on out there.
Wow, that's exciting. I've wished for that my entire 27-year career.
Well, it hasn't quite happened in Idaho. Our Attorney General has decided not to sign on to that yet, but we're going to be talking to him.
Just let me talk to him.
In any case, I do see some change coming. Do you recommend to your patients at times that they also seek other methods of therapy, such as energy methods or acupuncture, polarity, Qigong, Reiki, and any of these to solve their problems?
I am definitely open to anything that will help. That's been my kind of my motto, my entire career is whatever it takes. Whatever it takes to help somebody get better. I was helped years ago in the mid-'90s with mononucleosis that was a reactivation when I had surgery. It was acupuncture that made it go away. I've always been open to those. And if people ask me, should I go do this? I say, absolutely. Try lots of different things. And then I also recommend them to do certain things that are alternative. Or if they need to go see a medical doctor for an issue that would require that.
My wife was dealing with cancer. She went to see a hypnotherapist, chiropractor named Dr. Hollingsworth. And
I know him well.
Okay. He was very effective in helping her with pain management. Do you think this is another way, or would you use hypnosis as part of the process?
I am totally open to any therapy, and hypnotherapy is one of them. And if some of those brainwaves can be changed through that, I'm open to that. There are patients who have asked me, they've heard that people meditating for a long time could help, and I say, you know what, if you can do that, do it. It might take hours and hours of meditation, and if you accomplish that, please let me know.
So have you referred anybody to hypnotherapists in the past?
I have.
Okay. So you're all for this. One more question. Do you see alternative and complementary practitioners playing a larger role in the integrative process of pain management in the next few years while we deal with this opioid crisis?
The public is demanding it. I think that, social media has gotten the word out really well. Unfortunately, if you watch the broadcast news, there isn't a lot because their budget comes from drug companies.
I want to thank Dr. Harmon for joining us this evening, offering his insights into many uses of neurofeedback. This is Bob Nuckelbauer signing off for Healthy Conclusions. We hope you will join us again in the next Sunday's edition for another hour of informative talk about nutrition, exercise, and alternative medicine options. Sponsored by Altrua Health Share on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM.